Airing on Asheville FM 103.3 LPFM in Asheville, this is The Final Straw Radio, a weekly anarchist and anti-authoritarian broadcasts and podcast emanating out of occupied Chalagi land in southern Appalachia. We bring you voices and perspectives from projects and struggles all around the world, and you can find our archives, transcripts, ways to follow us and support us at thefinalstrawradio.noblogs.org. This week we speak with two students from Serbia and another anarchist comrade who participated in student and other movements earlier in the century, who talk about the anti-corruption protests that have rocked the Serbian Progressive Party government of President Vučić since the deadly collapse of a recently opened concrete train platform canopy in Novi Sad on November 1st of 2024. So far, killing 16 people. Starting with student demonstrations for transparency and accountability from the government that were answered with violence and subterfuge, the protests have grown and drawn from wider and wider portions of the public into millions taking the streets, creating autonomous assemblies and plenums, rejecting the political parties. The guests speak about the growth, the reactions against it, and the possibilities that they see as the seeds of what could bring the situation from social movement to social revolution. I hope you enjoy.
Hi, my name is Ilik. I come from somewhere in the central Serbia. Right now I live and study in Belgrade. I'm a student and an anarchist. I go by Day Annie.
Hello, I am you can call me random, like a random anarchist. I am from Belgrade, living in Belgrade at this point and in my 30s.
Hello, my name is Koko. I am a Bosnian anarchist living and studying in Serbia, in Belgrade specifically.
Awesome. Thank you all for taking the time to have this conversation. I really appreciate it. I know things are pretty busy right there. The Yugosphere has seen some of its largest demonstrations and blockades ever following a train disaster on November 1st of 2024. Could you speak a bit about what happened in Novi Sad and what has come out about the conditions there since the tragedy?
Well, a train station canopy collapsed on the 1st of November, killing originally 15 people. That's the number that most people remember. Now it's 16 because another person died yesterday. The canopy was renovated just 4 months earlier by a foreign corporation, and it was, officially opened and all that. This has really connected to a lot of people because, well, it's a place that many people have visited. I myself had been under that canopy just a few months before it had collapsed. And also concerning the last person that died just yesterday, they had been kept, since late January. Their brains had basically become mush, and there was no hope of recovery. They literally didn't have a brain. Their family was telling the doctors to turn off the machines, let the person die, but the state didn't let them die because they knew that this would infuriate the people protesting.
I know that information had come out after the fact about the conditions around which that construction had occurred and whether or not there was due diligence, whether or not that construction was done in accord with the regulations for safety. Could you talk a little bit about that?
As far as I know, we actually don't have documents about that. A lot of documents aren't released, so that's only speculations as far as I know.
The vast majority of documents haven't been released. But I mean, it's Serbia, it's obvious. They didn't follow regulations.
So one of the main requests from student movement is to release all the paperwork so we can know what happened. And the government did release a big amount of papers, but nothing from those papers are actually the relevant part that is about responsibilities. What we know is that the president himself kind of tried to speed up this process. And the price for this from the companies that were working were very high, but he said, yeah, you need to finish it. I don't care. Just finish it in the quickest amount because we said it will be finished till then for the public and stuff like that. And it's done by foreign countries, but there is this contractors that are not foreign. So it's foreign and domestic also. Everybody is involved. And officially, at the day of the accident, official status of this railway station was still in renovation, but it was free for public to use. So yeah, that's what I wanted to add.
Yeah, and I guess that's an important point in terms of contractors and foreign-owned corporations. I know in situations like this, it could be pretty easy for the authorities who determine the safety of a space to say, oh, that was because of, non-local contractors and maybe they broke some rules that we didn't know about and blah, 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 blah. But if it was still listed under renovation, like that's still the official authorities are the ones who are taking responsibility, right, for the safety of this public infrastructure that's paid for by taxpayers. Great. Thank you for that clarification. So can folks talk about what the state's initial reactions to the demands by the student led movement for transparency and accountability were like? Were they open to it? Did they give just short, abrupt answers? Or did the ruling SNS party respond in a reactionary manner? How did that go?
Initially there were protests right after the collapse of the canopy. And they were essentially led by the opposition. A few communists attacked the municipality building in Novi Sad, and the opposition called them essentially infiltrators by the government. The government didn't respond much to these. However, a student blockade started in Belgrade at the Faculty of Drama Arts, and this was independent of any party, and the state responded with violence. They arrested multiple students, even though the blockade had only been declared to last 22 hours. But after the arrests, the faculty went into full blockade and many others followed. After the blockade had started, the government ignored them for a while. They just thought it would die down. Then they made token amends and pretended they had fulfilled all the demands, which they still do pretend to do now. But they still didn't talk much about the actual protests. Only now are they talking about them all the time, but they are becoming really quite aggressive, openly talking about violence against the people in blockades.
And during the start, when blockades were starting, some random government officials got fired to be used as a scapegoat, but it didn't really go well publicly because people didn't really care about those specific people. People cared about the government as a whole and about releasing documents and finding a responsibility. The whole government was responsible for that, not just a few specific individuals. Those people who were arrested were let go after a few days. So those were fake arrests.
Also, multiple government officials had, in the first days of the blockade, attacked students, physically attacked students, and they weren't punished. They never have been punished for it. There are also multiple cases of students getting run over by cars during their daily traffic blockades. They hold 15-minute traffic blockades. I suppose now it's 16 minutes. And those people who were running over the students were usually discovered to be supporters of the government.
Fortunately, no one died from car runovers, but a lot of people were harmed by that. How many of them happened? I think 4 or 5, right?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, so there's a lot there. It seems to me like ostensibly for a government that is supposed to be representative of the population, having demands for clarification and transparency should be pretty par for the course and pretty natural. But when it's a part of the population that is not clearly a part of the electoral system or partisan, that is offering critique or criticism or making demands for the state to have, especially when the concern relates to concepts of corruption, that sort of quick call for police to intervene and apply violence, I think kind of says a lot about the state apparatus, and maybe it touches a little too close to the truth. Can you talk about that and a bit about what the blockades have looked like and what, other than the cars attacking people, what police violence has been like? Has it been soft blockades by the students, or have they been taking buses and blocking streets, or what does that look like?
I can give one short answer. Just one thing about car attacks. It's important to mention that the president himself publicly on the television that is watched by all the country said, when the second or first car drive-in crowd happened, he said that it is a legal thing to do and that the driver just drove on his road and somebody blocked the road, so he had full right to drive through the crowd. And this is something that instigated other similar accidents, some of which were by official members of ruling party, and also other types of smaller kind of violences, like not by car, but just physically. Yeah, but about blockade and faculty, I will let the active students talk about it. Yeah.
Concerning the demands, well, really, when you look into the demands, the first demand is to release all the documentation about the renovation of the canopy, which had collapsed, and the whole train station. The second demand is to release all the protesters, all the people who were arrested in relation to the student protests. The third demand is to arrest and process and remove from their positions the officials who had attacked students. And the fourth demand is the only social one, which is to increase spending for higher education by 20% and decrease scholarship costs by 50%. Because the government spending on higher education is only 0.91% of the GDP, while the average for Central and Eastern Europe is 1.71, which means the Serbian state should be spending almost twice as much on higher education than it is. And this is, of course, the difference is, of course, paid by us through scholarships.
Also, just before the blockade started, there was a talk that the government wants to lower the budget for higher education and actually give it instead to foreign private universities to come and open schools here.
Because this is one specific party has I think been in control for a little bit now. Can you talk about the politics? Like if someone in the US hears about, the Progressive Party in Serbia, they're going to think of the terminology progressive in modern usage in the US, which tends to mean a little left of liberal. Can you talk about the politics of the Progressive Party, how accountable they are to the voting populace, and sort of what their policies tend to be?
They're actually a branch of Serbian Radical Party, a far-right, a fascist party from 90s.
Which has been responsible for many war crimes in the 90s. In fact, they had their own paramilitary unit, which was infamous for committing war crimes in Croatia. In fact, their leader was famously in court at The Hague for many years, and he essentially got off scot-free, which essentially proves the incapability of the Hague court. But this current president was actually one of his best friends and most confident supporters before founding his own Progressive Party, which essentially retains the same people from the fascist party, which they were part of earlier. By the way, Vučić has been, there are pictures of him from the 90s wearing neo-Nazi shirts and other symbolics.
Yeah, and the whole concept of the whole party is they're progressive in comparison to the Serbian Radical Party. In the sense they are they're pretending to be more neoliberal. They are more pro-EU, and that's about it for the difference. That's basically it about them.
The Radical Party sucked Russia's the Progressive Party sucks everyone's.
Yeah, I can add just something for people listening outside of this our cultural context that they don't know. So the parties that were changing leading the state before this party were mostly pro-EU, and the population was not satisfied by their politics, but by their neoliberal measures, by killing off public sectors and stuff like that. So a lot of discontent was present in Serbia before Progressive Party became leaders. So this was felt by Vučić, and they at that point decided to get out of Radical Party, because Radical Party was always the strongest in opposition. So the biggest part of population, the most consistent votes, were this Radical Party. So they said, we are now to all the donors of capital, they said, we will take a lot of these votes from Radical Party, and they will feed this nationalistic need or this right-wing need of this populace, and they will vote for us, but we will switch to more liberal and more neoliberal policies. So this was their persuasion to be supported by capitalists from our country and from European Union and from West and from East, from everybody. So that's how they came to power. And from that point on, they needed to fight this power fight on two fronts. One was propaganda to its people. So they were very clever with this, saying right-wing things to right-wing people, saying centrist things to centrist people and stuff like that, and to be ultra pro-EU and to do whatever European Union asks them to do for them to get this international support. And at the end, this is why, still to this day, this protest is not supported by EU, by Russia, by China, and by US. So nobody supports this protest because Vučić is, but I hope soon was, a great player and great manipulator, ex-fascist. So that's what I want to say.
I think it would be useful to give some historical context back from 90s to the 2000, and then the government afterwards till the SNS came into the power. Comrade, can you do that? You were alive back then during 2000s. I wasn't, so.
I can. So 90s was a fall of like Yugoslavia, like socialist country, and it was like still in name socialist, but neoliberal reforms already started, but disguised it as some, I don't know, whatever. And with all of the wars and stuff like that, Socialist Party was in power together with this radical party, and the opposition was fully like United Democratic Front, also like neoliberal, nationalistic and stuff like that, just highly anti-communist and anti-socialist. That was their main like point of getting their votes, because people were in all the 80s when Tito died and stuff like that. All this nationalist movement started to creep all over Yugoslavia. So that was cashed in 90s by Socialist Party and by Radical Party and by the opposition. So everybody was highly nationalistic. It was a living hell. Also, these democratic parties, people forget, were also highly nationalistic, just presented themselves and their nationalism in like more cultured way. So they came to the power after like the 5th October in 2000, and they led this European Union integration, neoliberal privatization.
Sorry for interrupting you.
Yeah.
For the context, 5th October was, I don't know how to explain, but basically a liberal revolution that lasted a few days, and the fascist government was overthrown and replaced with a neoliberal one.
Yeah, that's what happened. And after, so from 2000 up until Progressive Party, different small difference democratic parties that were all pro-EU and all neoliberal were in power, and then this nationalistic dissatisfaction started to brew. And that's where this Progressive Party comes as ex-radical party, but they were the most successful mobsters in continuing their propaganda that they're also progressive in a sense of European Union, like not really progressive, but like liberal, but also nationalistic, but also they are big friends of Putin for the people who like Putin, but they're also big friends of whoever is the president of US, because there are people who are pro-US. So they also present themselves as anti-NATO, because this is a big part of Serbian culture, because we were bombarded by NATO, but they also do some contracts with NATO. So they did everything. They're no point, like they're like just, we do whatever we need to be held in power. We don't have any ideology. We just have an active ideology of European Union that is like neoliberal. And now all of this happened partly because people are fed up with these mobsters that overdid everything.
So if one of the early sources of opposition following the disaster at the Novi Sad train station was oppositional parties getting into the streets, does this feel like this is more of an autonomous social movement that's been developing? And like I said, if the students are like a non-partisan portion of the general population, does this seem, the energy from the last 4 months feel like it is something that could be co-opted by oppositional parties for electoral purposes? Or does it feel like it is managing to stand outside of the electoral framework and the opportunities that are quote unquote presented by the various parties that run for office?
Yeah, the last few years we had many different movements that were for one or other reason against the government. small number of them was started by the opposition or opposition aligned organizations, but most of them were started by random people who were very unhappy with the current government. All of them, literally every single one of them, was after some time co-opted by the opposition and started being used just for their popularity. For context, opposition is very unpopular because they were in power before SNS came into the power, and they were actually democratically replaced by SNS. That's how much people didn't like them. For context, it's very unusual here that someone is democratically replaced. Like, we are used to dictators here, unfortunately. And basically, like, all the protests they co-opted, they pacified. They were always calling for peaceful protest, for slow protest, for the changes in the government, basically using it as a political point, for them to get like more people into the government instead of actually making systematic changes. So some of them were very massive. Most of them had like at least a few protests that were more than 100,000 people, but it didn't lead anywhere. This time, opposition tried to start protests. Actually, they did start first protests, but it failed, of course. After that, students started blockading, and that became like very popular, and it spread first in the Belgrade and Novi Sad, and after that throughout the whole country. And that became a new front for fighting the government. So students just blocked the university. Students also were blocking the streets every day, with every school holding 15 minutes, 16 minutes of silence for the people who died in Novi Sad. And throughout time, methods evolved. There were like walks from town to town in order to spread the information, because government propaganda is very strong. And not everyone uses social media, older people don't. But for younger people, information was mostly spread through social media. Opposition tried to co-opt that too, but it was very unsuccessful because people saw what they were doing, because they were doing that for the last few years. Everyone is very angry, both at the government, and a lot of people are angry at the opposition. And the opposition at the start didn't even try to co-opt it. Actually, they were starting to co-opt it later, but at the start they were trying to stop it because they saw student blockades as, I don't know, something that could also threaten them. But after they didn't succeed in that, they started trying to co-opt it by having their people infiltrate the blockades at schools. Blockades is the word we use for occupations. They have multiple quote-unquote student organizations or youth organizations, which are, some of them are pretending not to be aligned with the opposition, some of them are openly aligned with the opposition, but all of them are advocating for the same things as the opposition and working with those parties. And we had a lot of problems with them at the start, depending on the school to school, but a lot of schools did have a problem with them at the start, but they lost control over universities very quickly. They actually never succeeded in fully taking control. So they tried to co-opt it, they're still trying to co-opt it, but it's not really working out. And this is now a social movement that first started as a student movement and then grew into workers started helping, farmers joined in, average people started just being part of the movement, and now it's a big social movement that opposition doesn't really have power over. They're trying to use it, of course. They're trying to be a peaceful solution where it's going to be a transitional government or there's going to be an election, and which they want to win because they're the only other party option. They're not a single party, they're a coalition, but they're the only other option to the current government when it comes to parties. But they are not really popular, and the more they're trying to push elections and transitional government and, well, anything that puts them into power, the more people are organizing by themselves. Now, actually, the last week, people after 15th, people started organizing a lot of people's assemblies, and a lot of places throughout the country are starting to be like more and more self-managed.
Well, I just want to say that like the opposition did organize the first protest, but that it was over after 2 days, and the blockades have been going on for many months. The people are they know that the opposition doesn't really want to change anything, because why would they? If they actually cause a change, that they can't make an election campaign on that. And after all, they were in power before Vučić, and we all know how they were. They were as bad or maybe even worse. They have been trying to co-opt the blockades many times, and they have been the varying success rates at various universities, but I think the most outrageous attempt was when they tried to, they planned to take over the protests that happened on the 15th of March, the largest gathering in the history of Serbia and perhaps Yugoslavia entirely, where they essentially wanted to storm the parliament after forcing the blockades into supporting them by organized chanting of, transitional government and stuff like that, and essentially feigning popular support.
I can add to this a little bit, because I think for people who are anarchists or close to anarchism, it's interesting to hear that, for example, we have this difference between parts of the opposition and the student movement that is led by direct democracy and these anarchistic principles. The difference is that this youth part of the opposition wanted to do violent things, to storm the parliament, to storm the president residency and stuff like that. So it's an interesting twist that I didn't expect. And also interesting for me as a little bit older anarchist involved in some earlier fights, student fights, that students are so, non-violent as a principle, as a whole. And that's also an interesting divide. And this could be discussed if you want. This is anthropologically and sociologically interesting how this movement in our history came to be. The other thing I wanted to talk about that is even more important is for people who are listening this to get the picture of how this biggest protest and this biggest movement in history of Serbia and Yugoslavia was created, because it didn't came from nowhere. It's nothing comes from nothing. So in social science kind of way. So one of the most important parts of this student movement is their principled direct democracy assemblies and occupations of faculties. And it didn't come to itself. So this was a tradition in Serbia from 2006, actually. And like every few or several years, some occupations of some faculties happened, and they were all done with these principles in mind and against student parliament movement. So we were fighting student parliament movement that were ultra soft reformistic, and we had some more social kind of approach, more anarchistic principles and stuff like that. But it never became this big. Like the last occupation was more than 10 years ago, and I thought this connection, this chain of few years of occupations happening was over, because there was nobody to pass these principles. But it actually happened. And now, for example, I heard in several faculties that were never connected to these fights before, like faculty of pharmacy, faculty of, engineering and stuff like that. The first assembly of these occupations were so full in these big halls that people didn't have space to stand, not just to sit in these big halls, but also they were outside looking in to try to be part of these big assemblies. And so this is really like an interesting point for me to discover why now, how now. I don't have a right answer, but I'm so glad it happened. And now this anarchistic principle of direct democracy and assemblies are spilling out of faculties and is starting to move through the cities all around Serbia. Myself, I was part of an assembly of several blocks together, had an assembly. The people immediately agreed on direct democracy, because now almost all the people who support these protests, and there are a lot of them, are also looking at this plenum direct democracy, assembly, this way of organizing, they're looking at it with love in their eyes, truly. And this is a big potential for anarchistic movement. Will it be used or will it be not used to establish itself as something that will continue beyond these protests? I hope so. I don't know if it will, but this is a magical moment for me to go to a assembly of 4 blocks with random middle-aged people. In 10 minutes, everybody was ready to do an assembly, fully aware of all the technicalities and voting and arguing in good faith and coming to conclusion, making these working groups for stuff like that. So I just wanted to mention, we don't have time to talk about this, but just to mention this string of this anarchistic organizing that actually was one of the biggest reasons this is so successful now. And because students don't have any leaders, it's like crucially forbidden. I mean, it's radically forbidden for them to have leaders amongst themselves, voted by themselves. So this all spilled from faculties to people. And now I'm taking this example, but it's more examples. This assembly that I was part of 300, 400 local people, everybody who took to tell something, to have a word, like to say something on the assembly, said their name, and then they said, and I am not a part of any party. So people are now making themselves, how do you say, not valuable, but what's the word? By saying they're not part of any political party. And everybody is taking that as a most natural, most normal, most valued way of expressing and organizing. At this moment, will it continue? I don't know, but I just wanted to take a little bit of time to tell all of this. That's it.
Also worth mentioning, the first directly democratic blockades that were organized in 2006, as the comrade mentioned, were organized by anarchists, as were the ones in the following years.
I have a few things to say about what was comrade talking about people understanding direct democracy and all that. I think it even goes like past that now, because just this morning I saw a post on Instagram, some random page. It's not anarchist or leftist or anything. It's just a random page, and it was just a post asking people about what they think about people's assemblies, and all comments were like, no, we don't need government, we don't need parliament, we can organize by ourselves, which was, I cannot describe how happy I am to see that. It's really beautiful to see that, especially like here where I didn't expect anything like here to happen ever. Of course, that's a small post on a random Instagram page, but it seems like the people there were just general population, and it's very nice to see that people are actually understanding that it's not just something temporary, but that they actually don't need government, that they can actually organize like this for everything. That's one thing. Another thing I wanted to say is that the important thing about this whole movement is that this movement is now lasting for more than 4 months, which is very important, because like when things last very short time, some people during that period might get radicalized, might continue using those principles, but when something lasts this long, and especially on the scale as this, it's gonna get into people's consciousness, and people are gonna continue organizing like this and seeing this as a normal way of organizing, which is very important for our movement and for generally future of this place. People's assemblies started just now, like a week ago, but they're already doing a lot better than we expected. People actually understand already how they're working, so that's actually a great thing. We were actually a bit scared about that people wouldn't understand, because like at the start, students had a lot of problems with organizing till everyone understood how direct democracy actually works, and that no one actually has power, that everyone can say whatever they think, that everyone has the right to have an opinion. People didn't understand that at the start, well, students, and it took like multiple months till that got where it needs to be. But with people seem to have learned that from students, and it seems that people's assemblies that are organizing now are being organized pretty well right from the start, which is really surprising and very good thing to see. I also wanted to ask the comrade who's older. You said that this is a principle for organizing student occupation since 2006 here, but student occupation has been organized this way also not just here, but in the whole Yugosphere. In Croatia, they have been organized. I know that in 2012 they were organized this way, but I would guess that there were more blockades like this. And also in Slovenia, student occupations were pretty common. From what I heard from comments from Slovenia, it was also organized similar to this. So I want to ask, is it maybe something that goes back to student blockades from Yugoslavia, how were they organized back then? Or is it really something that started like in this century? I mean, it's normal that it would spread both to Croatia and Slovenia or the other way around because we're all very culturally connected. As a matter of fact, we like in Croatia and here we speak the same language, and Slovenia, and we can understand Slovenian. Slovenians can understand Serbo-Croatian, so it's very natural that it would spread. But I'm interested: is it like really something that's like from this century, or does it go back to Yugoslavia?
That's a great and important topic to talk about. You know, like the first example of student movement being like obviously anarchistically based, like in organization, was 68 in France. Like, and the famous pamphlet of, I know in Serbian how it's called, was spread by...
On the poverty of student life?
Yeah, was spread around faculties on the first day of faculty, and that's how they started to do this. I'm not sure. I mean, I think it was not being used before 90s, and I'm sure it wasn't used in the 90s because 90s was full of...
Sorry for interrupting you.
Yeah.
You said it was spread on university grounds. Where is it? Are you talking about France or are you talking about here? And in what specific blockade are we talking about?
No, I'm talking about France, and it was spread on faculties. Basically, anarchist and situationist groups printed this pamphlet and put on each chair for the first year, for the guys who were and girls who were studying for the first year. So this entrance, first day on faculty, everybody had illegally, I mean, not planned by faculty, obviously. Each one had its own pamphlet all across France on all the chairs that were they sitting, like officially to have this introduction lecture by faculty members or whatever. That's 68. In Yugoslavia, I don't think something like this happened ever, as far as I know. And 90s had like this strong student leadership that produced some gross political figures after, be it highly right-wing reactionary or neoliberal half reactionary idiots. And this was like a bad part of this student movement. There is this big metaphysical border between 90s and 206 movement, because they were fighting against big war-making tyrant. And in 2006, there was nothing radical like this to help all the population to get them up, but it was mostly social, about having free education, and they were kind of having this communist and anarchist symbolism, and there was a lot of fighting back from public sector, from politicians, from opposition, from everybody, because they were still in this era of active anti-communism, active anti-socialism, that communism was basically a taboo word. It was something that you were looked as a madman if you said 2006. But the comrades and comrades that did this fight led the... so they had their experience and shared their experience with Croatian anarchists and activists. So they did this direct democracy in Croatia that was very successful. And then they wrote this Blokadna kuharica. So it's like a cookbook for occupation of students with direct democracy that was passed after that to my generation, to 2011, then to 2014. And then this same pamphlet from Croatia was read by this student movement how to do direct democracy. So this is actually a 21st century thing in this context.
Funny thing about that, our dictator or president, however you want to call him, labeled all students as Croatian anarchists who are working for Croatian intelligence agency because of that pamphlet. Throughout this whole movement, he used many different labels for students, like anywhere from anarchists to Croatian spies to
Bolshevik assemblies.
Yeah.
Ustashas?
Croatian fascists from Second World War. He also called us Zborashi, which are Yugoslav fascists from Second World War, very small faction, but they did exist. So it's very funny how many different labels he gave us. He gave us literally every label that's like extreme on a political compass.
Yeah, it takes quite a lot of creativity to think of all these labels that gave us, which to me proves that they think about this stuff a lot, in their free time, that they're seething while trying to fall asleep,
You're living rent-free in their heads, as we say.
Yeah, they're crying themselves to sleep thinking about this stuff.
Yeah, but it's interesting, too. They've made claims that the student movements are funneled or like being paid by the U.S. or other states through the related NGOs, which in some ways kind of like it seems like stuff that Putin has said, for instance, in the past of trying to suppress social movements. And they're like, it's not untrue to say that the U.S. has used NGO connections or what have you to fund opposition movements in countries that it's trying to overthrow. It seems like if the social movement is expanding to wider and wider parts of the population, from pensioners to professionals to lawyers and law students, engineers, as was mentioned, you've got like a cops union that has signed statements and also demanded more pay. Like, does it seem like parts of the population are actually buying the idea that this is some sort of controlled opposition from outside that's threatening to destabilize like the glorious Serbian country?
That's actually very funny because in this situation, government is supported by the US.
Actually, since the bombing of 1999, the old General Staff building has been, it was bombed by America, and it was left, in its half destroyed state as a monument to the people who lost their lives during the bombing. And now, just like a week ago or something, Vučić signed a deal with Trump Jr. to destroy the old General Staff building and replace it with a large luxury hotel. By the way, the old General Staff building is one of the main tourist attractions of Belgrade. Everyone wants to see the old destroyed building.
And then they can stay in it for luxury money. But I mean, I guess maybe when these statements were being made too, it was the Biden administration that was in power, the one that was, arming and giving intelligence to Ukraine in opposition to the Russian invasion. So, I mean, I think there's a lot of different factors that have shifted over the last few months, and probably the stories that Vučić is telling about why this popular movement is bad are having to shift according to the times and his allies.
It is total paradoxical because Vučić was working closely with Biden and with Trump on an equal level and loved both on an equal level. So he is not closer to the right-wing one. It doesn't matter from where money comes, he likes them. It doesn't matter who it is. But it is a populist thing to be anti-American, and he knows this, and that's why he says it. And this narrative of him working with NATO, working with America, doesn't go too much into the public eye for people that are not on social media. So they see him as some kind of savior from that. But also he tries to there is this a wild thing because also, for example, Russian state helps him actively against this protest. So both Russia and US are against this protest and actively helping this government. And in this
also China.
And China. But China is, I think, the least involved directly. I'm not excusing them. I'm just saying and there is this there is this,
and the EU,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
not officially.
EU is doing the most clandestine kind of
Yeah. They love lithium.
Yeah, they love lithium. They need to dig this lithium for the car industry in Germany, and it is like this big, ironically, ecological movement of EU that they try to dig up lithium from Serbia. And so this is Rio Tinto and everything. So Vučić knows what he is doing. He is talking about, against everybody that he thinks his voters will like, but he is working closely with all the governments, so actively being helped by East, by West, but just the only people who are getting by these are working class and students.
The Final Straw is a proud member of the Channel Zero network of anarchist podcasts, and here's a jingle from another member of CZN.
The Anarchist.
Radio Berlin.
From across the pond.
It's the Anarchist Radio Berlin.
With audios in English, Spanish and German.
And please,
don't mention the war. You can find us at channelzeronetwork.com and aradio-berlin.org.
Hey listeners, this is Bursts breaking that fourth audio wall. I just want to say thanks to the folks that have sent in contributions to us of the monetary sort or mentioned us on social media. That's really awesome. Very much appreciate it. But hey, we'll take more money. If anybody does feel like contributing to our Patreon, we have a buttload. I measured, it's actually a metric buttload of interviews that are going to be coming out there a little bit early, such as an interview that Ian did with Enno Bonzo about art and anarchism, who is a guest, is a frequent contributor to covers of PM Press books, and was one of the participants in the art and anarchism panel at the ACAB that we aired a couple of months ago. There's an interview that I did with Kate Bertash about flock cameras and resistance to them, and automated license plate reader cameras that are flooding the U.S. And creating a surveillance dragnet. I've got in the works, I just interviewed David E. Gilbert, not the former political prisoner, but the author of a book about indigenous farming communities in Indonesia that have reclaimed their land and are not only working it in collective manners, but restoring the ecosystem around them. I've got a chat ongoing with Hibachi Lamar, a political prisoner and Black anarchist member of the Black Autonomy Federation. So we've just got a ton of stuff that's going to be coming out just on the Patreon for the next few weeks, and sifting out to the general listenership for free after that. But yeah, if you feel like supporting our ability to buy some new equipment, print some more stickers and t-shirts, that sort of stuff, pay for the copies of zines that we send to prisoners occasionally, or the transcription work that we do, then please take a look at our donate page and consider supporting us monetarily. If you can't do that, there's a whole list of things that you can do, like rate us on the podcast apps and give us feedback. You could contribute if you feel like participating in the show. You can always use help copy editing or contributing interviews even. It's a good time to learn. Or you could talk to a local community, public, or college radio station and propose our programming for their airwaves. We produce a weekly 58-minute free and FCC-compliant radio show that they can take that'll cover things from an anti-authoritarian, anti-capitalist perspective, local, regional, and national and international, and anti-national news. So anyway, this is me rambling very late at night. I'm a bit tired after working on this one, but I hope you all enjoy the interview, and thanks for the support in the various ways that you do. And most importantly, it's great to know that y'all are in the streets and doing stuff. I hope this is helpful to the movement. Sali. In 2021, we interviewed a Serbian anarchist about, among other things, a demonstration against the Rio Tinto-run lithium mine in the Jadar Valley, which threatened the health of and access to drinking water, as well as local agriculture, and this was halted by public protests. In 2024, the Serbian Constitutional Court overruled the cancellation of this mining project, which has led to a restart to the demonstrations. And a bunch of farmers have been joining, maybe for their own anti-corruption reasons, but maybe also looking at this as a wider corruption scandal. But I wonder if you could talk about how the ecological and farmer struggle in Jadar has informed the ongoing demonstration against corruption. They've been bringing their tractors in and helping to block traffic, right?
Well, to me personally, as a farmer, a peasant from Bosnia, I mean, it's not very different from being a farmer in Serbia. We are used to every incarnation of the state us over, and we do not expect any good to come out of the state or capitalism. However, farmers have generally been passive, and the Rio Tinto situation has changed this somewhat, because the people living there in Jadar Valley stand to lose their homes and their entire legacy, because here it's not like in the West where people see home as just a place where they live. Here, at least for farmers, where their ancestors are from is very important. My family has been living on the same piece of land for 200 years. It means something to us. So, of course, these farmers from Jadar...
For cultural context, yeah, I think that's only for villages. It's very much not a thing in the city.
So, these farmers in Jadar are not just very unhappy, they're actually willing to work against the state on this. And in fact, arguably, the situation in Western Serbia is even more radical than in Belgrade. A few months ago, they actually stormed their municipal building in Bogatić and forced all the politicians out of it. Just like yesterday or 2 days ago, they were throwing eggs at the municipality building and at their mayor, who is from the ruling party. And even beyond Western Serbia...
it's a tradition out there. From what I'm seeing, they're doing it regularly, and not just municipality building, but also mayor's house.
Yeah,
it's not 5 eggs; it's hundreds and hundreds of eggs.
And even beyond Western Serbia, for instance, in Vojvodina, the north of the country, farmers have been leading their own protests, which have now integrated into the wider popular movement. They have been helping the blockades, and even before that, they were working on their own. This, though, is for different reasons, because they got fucked over by the state, because the state promised them greater subsidies and then they didn't give them greater subsidies. So essentially the state scammed them.
And for ecological movement, context behind that, basically Rio Tinto found a lot of lithium in Matra, which is, how to explain it, Western Serbia, where there's a lot of farmland and there's a lot of rivers there. Mining that lithium would harm the whole environment and would put a lot of heavy materials into the water, which would pretty much poison the land all over. And on top of that, in order to mine, a lot of people would need to move out. So it's on top of the environmental damage that would happen. And Rio Tinto is a comically evil company or corporation. They have been working with pretty much every fascist government. They have worked with Franco in Spain. They have worked with Hitler. They have mined the resources by displacing a lot of natives in Australia.
They're primarily active in Australia, yeah.
Yeah, so they're kind of a comically evil company. If you wanted to write a story and make a comically evil company, you wouldn't be able to make as comically evil company as this one is.
Yeah, in Australia some years ago, it was a pretty famous case. In their mining expedition, there was a cave with native art inside, and it was kind of in their way, not directly, but
and they were, of course, right?
They were kind of afraid that the state would impose sanctions on their mining operation in order to protect the cave. So what did they do? They destroyed the cave, and eventually the court actually ordered them to rebuild the cave. Actually, reconstruct a cave.
Yeah, they're comically evil.
Can I add something? There is this funny anecdote that kind of demonstrates what's happening. So some of the ecological activists started to kind of, to complain to European Union that this lithium deal in Serbia is actually very harmful to Serbian people and to local communities that are including a big amount of land and big population. So the European Union held some kind of whatever assembly on this topic. And the people who were talking against lithium was 1 or 2 people allowed to talk from Serbia. And there was like several representatives of Rio Tinto, several representatives of countries that support this. I mean, the biggest part of the European Union supports, I think 2 or 3 countries don't, like Slovakia or something like that. And there is this documentary that was shown there as an example of argument. And this documentary was filmed by a Dutch university, and it's a Dutch university for mineral extraction or whatever, mining, whatever. I don't know what this part of science is called. And they are famous, this university, by asking their students, like having this cool documentary part of their studying, to film something about some mining somewhere, and to explain in this documentary why mining is actually good and fine and ecological and productive and good for everybody. So they used this documentary that shows local Serbian people as dumb, as don't having any arguments. I mean, you all know how documentaries can look if you know how to cut them and you know how to direct them. They even said that Serbia is like they're using this anti-Russian sentiment in Europe to get their points for doing lithium, because they're saying all of these people who are against lithium are actually pro-Russian paid activists. The same as Russian agents use anti-liberalism to gain their own support in Serbian people. So it's two-way street. But at this moment, we are much more in danger from like this Rio Tinto stuff in Western Serbia, and we are also in danger from Chinese company Zijin in Eastern Serbia that is starting to mine every hill and every valley, to the point where one of the biggest cities in Eastern Serbia was trying to sign, and listen to this now and please believe me, they were trying to sign some, approvement for Xi Jinping to be a representative of Zaječar in state bureaucracy of Serbia. You heard me right. For Xi Jinping to be a representative of Zaječar in state parliament and state bureaucracy. Why? Because they wanted to build roads on unapproved, unurbanistically planned land, so they can cut costs for transporting stuff that they extract or transporting machinery to cut the land. So this was stopped basically by people trying to enter the small local parliament of this town, and this paper was not signed. But it is as an, South Park episode to have a Chinese company be a representative of whole city on the state level. This was luckily stopped, and this luckily was in time, like day after this big walks around country by student movement, which was very important and raised the atmosphere in this small town. So the day after, when this paper should have been signed in this local parliament, people fired up by student movement passing through town physically stopped this happening, and now they're stopping it every time it is supposed to happen. And that's one more thing I wanted to say. These students that are walking hundreds and hundreds of kilometers, if you can imagine, people who are listening, walking in big groups through the cities, through the smallest villages, and just hugging people and just, saying some, meaningless, like, we are all together, let's fight this, stuff like that. People are, for the first time, seeing that somebody is against this, and that it's not some evil Western or whoever, like agents. It's just students trying to do best for their people. So this is also an important thing to mention. This big, crazy, big walks in the middle of winter. They're like making marauders from their, like big heroes for themselves, like doing this.
By the way, concerning Rio Tinto, looking at the Wikipedia page, their controversy section includes such gems as poor working conditions, Rio Tinto massacre, interference from Axis powers during World War II, racism, bullying, and sexual harassment, Jukan Gorge destruction, that's the one I mentioned, and misplaced radioactive capsule, environment, labor and human rights, and corruption allegations.
Holy fuck!
They're just, comically evil.
Yeah, that's comically evil. Like, you couldn't write like more comically evil thing. To go back to the EU and Rio Tinto, basically for EU, mining is great because Rio Tinto and Serbia made a deal with European Union, or well, with Germany. I don't know. Is European Union or Germany? I don't know. But basically, Germany would get a lot of that lithium for cheap, from what I know, because they need it for their car industry, because lithium-based batteries. And for Rio Tinto, you said that protests were happening back in 2021. Yeah, they were happening back then. There was an international campaign, and they stopped. Though they didn't really stop; they just paused. And they restarted last year, I think, a few months before this thing in Novi Sad happened. And farmers have been fighting them ever since.
Yeah, it's really cool to be seeing the confluence of these different social parts of the general population coming in and contributing and saying, yeah, there's corruption. We don't trust the current administration. We want clarity about this disaster that happened. And also, here's another element of what the kind of society that we want. We want better pay. We want more funding for education. You've had medical workers come in to the demonstrations and participate or go on, short strikes. So at the end of January, Prime Minister Vučić of the ruling SNS party and the mayor of Novi Sad also, both offered to resign their positions in response to attacks against demonstrators on the 28th January by party-aligned hooligans, which Vučić was stating that those responsible for the train station disaster also must be held to account. So protests have continued through the months to bring huge amounts of people into the streets, with occupations of state media outlets, the peremptory shutdown of National Assembly for quote-unquote safety concerns, promises of general strikes by unions, and increased violence by party loyalists against those in the streets. I want to know, can you talk about the demonstrations that happened on the 15th and what has come out of that, the 15th of March? What have the responses been to those demonstrations?
First, for Vučić, that for Prime Minister, that whole resignation was just a public stunt. Officially, by the law, his resignation should have been accepted on the first assembly of the parliament, but it wasn't. It wasn't accepted for 2 months. It was accepted a few days ago, and a few days ago, when it was accepted, government officially fell. Though at that point it was very expected to happen, but the important thing is that his resignation was just a public stunt at that moment. For 15th, though, any of comrades want to talk?
All right, so large protests have been happening in Serbia since December, and the 15th was...
Actually, every 15 days there was a big protest in different city.
Yeah, and the 15th was going to be the largest protest, and indeed it was. But the whole thing about it, what's really important for, is that the state threatened violence and expected a great degree of violence, and in fact they had drove even tanks into Belgrade. They had increased the salaries of the gendarmerie and given policemen much greater privileges in committing violence. They had driven lots of tractors from random places in Serbia, and the general expectation was that he was going to block every entrance and exit from the city and institute a curfew and perhaps cut telecommunication, and that he was going to destroy the protests violently. That's the prelude to the 15th.
Okay, I'm going to talk about 15th itself. There are many speculations about how many people were there. State said there were 107,000, though they're always underestimating by at least 5 to 10 times. And other estimates go anywhere between from 375,000. Some are, most of them are 5 to 800,000, and some go as far as 1,650,000. Streets were really full. There were definitely like multiple hundreds of thousands. When it comes to actual number, I think it's important to mention that Ana Brnabić, the current president of the assembly, of the parliament, accidentally said that at the protest there were 3.5 million ears. So there is a guess that the official number is actually 1,750,000.
Wow.
Which would be on the higher end of estimates, though we don't know. That's just a thing that came out of her mouth accidentally. So we don't know, is it that official government information, but it's not official, because like officially they're saying that there was only 107,000, which is definitely not true. There was 107,000 just at one of the meeting places 2.5 hours before the protest started. The protest lasted from 4 to 10 p.m. and it was expected for that time to be peaceful, because students called for a peaceful protest, and the government said that, well, Vučić, the president, said that if the protest isn't peaceful, the ones who will be blamed for that will be the organizers, which are students. So pretty much all students would be blamed for that. So everyone expected for that from 4 to 10 to be peaceful, and then after 10 for chaos to start. What ended up happening was that protest was peaceful, and around 8 p.m., during 15 minutes of silence, back then it was still 15, government used sound cannons. What's the acronym for that?
LRAD.
Yeah. A lot of people were harmed by that. Officially, that same evening, 55 people came into the hospital, though most people came 1 or 2 days later. Number so far is in the hundreds. We don't know the number specifically. But what we know is that people were very discriminated in the hospitals. Their papers were labeled with protest, and people who called for help were just told, do not come. We cannot give you help. When the sound cannons were activated, chaos just started. I wasn't there. I was a bit further away, like a kilometer or 2, in a tunnel actually. So I was protected from the sound cannons. But when I came out on the other side, we saw like thousands and thousands of people just running down the street and being totally disoriented. And me and my friends started asking people what's going on, and no one knew what's going on. Everyone was just scared and was just trying to get out. And we started running in the opposite direction of the people, well, from the direction where people started running from, in order to see what's going on there. And there we saw blue, how do you say buckling? We saw blue flares were lighted up, and that signaled the retreat. And students called for retreat to the faculties. And at that point, faculties were full. Like in the matter of minutes, they were full of people. And they then notified everyone that it's an end of student protest because the government attacked. And immediately after that, there were many names for it. They were like people's protest or workers' protest. I don't know, however they called it. Started immediately after that, and people came back just ready to fight instead of just for peaceful protest. And people came in front of the parliament. There was a lot of gendarmerie and police that was borderline militarized. A lot of hooligans were there and attacked people. There were fights there. Some fights happened and standoff happened. Then another fight and people retreated for the second time, and that's when it ended. Vučić, from his speech that happened at 10 p.m., it seems like he was ready for a bloodshed and for curfew. But none of that happened because students called for retreat, and then afterwards, the second protest that happened immediately afterwards, people retreated instead of fighting, which back then didn't seem like that smart of an option because like Vučić immediately proclaimed the victory over the colored revolution, as he calls it. And we expected that there's gonna be more pressure for the government and all of that. But instead what happened is that people started organizing immediately afterwards. People's assemblies started appearing everywhere. And now we have a situation where people are attacking government officials, people are organizing by themselves and making decisions for the community on the level of that community.
Comrade?
Yeah, I wanted to add because people like students, like two of them, they're involved too much and kind of maybe can't see how good the greater picture looks in a sense of self-organized, biggest protest in the history of region. Let's call it 1 million. So I know there is a critique and a valid critique of this, like a safety working group of the student assemblies that are like little bit acting like a police inside the student movement. But if we take this criticism and just put it away for a second, people like we as an anarchist should affirm this and should pass this to everybody in the world. Self-organized, fully self-organized people, students, were guards, or how do you say, redari, the ones that were like saying who to go where, you cannot pass this street here, whatever. So it was fully self-organized, and it was almost perfectly organized for the biggest protest in the history of region. This should be underlined, this should be studied, this should be like an argument for anarchists that the self-organization works even in the very complex, very dangerous, and very massive movements and actions of these movements. For example, these blue flares. Can you imagine, just to finish the sentence, so can you imagine not being able to see the end of the people, and somewhere there you see a blue flare, and somewhere like 45 degrees from there, somewhere you see a blue flare, and it was all self-organized to know this is a retreat. And it's not a retreat of a black bloc movement. This is 1 million people, and 1 million people threatened by violence. And I can talk about fascist groups that were ready inside of different wildly weird, bizarre touristic attraction parts of city that were like enclosed with fascists. This was also weird. I can talk about it if you think I should, but this should always be like important that this is self-organized and was helped by motorcyclists like that were helping students and stuff like that. Yeah.
I think it's also important to mention about fascists and all that, but before that I want to mention about self-organizing. You didn't actually say the most important part about self-organizing, and that is that during the weekend, the government, well, not officially the government, but the ruling party sent to all companies that drive buses and trains and all that, a message that should not work during the weekend, and all the public transport throughout the whole country during the whole weekend was cancelled. And people weren't able to come. So what happened was that people by themselves like organized transportation, and hundreds of thousands of people actually came to Belgrade. And this is not like some huge country. It's like 6 million people or 6.5, something like that. And out of that, like 20% live in the capital. So hundreds of thousands of people coming from outside of the capital was a huge thing. And especially when it's self-organized. On top of that, all those people stayed in Belgrade in self-organized housing, like people just opened their doors to people, and hundreds of thousands of people were housed by just normal people here. And all other things like food, water, all of that was self-organized for hundreds of thousands of people, which is just insane to think about. And it just proves the power of self-organizing and that people can actually organize things. That's all I have to say. Comrade, continue.
I wanted to add about this. So for the listeners, imagine hundreds of thousands of people arriving to your city, and then you open, I saw this, you open a Google document, like a Google, how do you say, not Excel, but Google Sheet, where you have thousands of people writing how many rooms they have, is it for smoking or not, is it for pets or not, what pets, is it for children or not, what food they can offer, what donations they take or don't, from what time to what time, what kind of beds. This was all fully self-organized. So there was not a single manager of this. This is an important point, and this can be historically also like an argument for anarchistic organizing. That's something that we should remind ourselves, as she said. So that's what I want to say. And I can talk about fascists that were paid by government, that were arriving with sticks, all dressed in like dark clothes, hidden faces. Famously, there was like this also Russian fascist group, pro-Russian. Then there was this like ultra-Serbian nationalistic fascist group that were organized and paid and came to this one small part of this park. I mean, one park that is in front of President Palace, where the protest took place, was surrounded by wires by government and filled with fake students who want to learn, who want to study, and want occupations of faculties to stop. And they were there for several days, and it was a touristic attraction. People, and you could be paid by government on some under the table way to be there for one shift or two shifts to act as a student that wants to study and wants the occupations to stop. And it was actually an ugly scene. I'm not saying this like it's not very funny. I mean, you can make fun of this government decision, but the people that were there were basically mostly poor people that needed some money. So they were acting as students. But this part was with wire in this park being ready. This was part of the park was being prepared for the protest when it happens, for this wired off part of park to defend President policy, and it was filled just before protest with fascists, like 5,000 fascists, and like strong men, or how should I say it? I saw the clips.
Goons.
So what?
Goons.
Yeah, goons. Yeah, with goons. So that's why students decided that one big part of the street in the middle of this million people protest was not to be entered at all. So the self-organized people just didn't enter the street. So million people just were basically barely breathing in this massive protest, and nobody was stepping a step into the street just because student like guards were saying, no, let's not do this. Yeah, that's what they want.
On top of that, they also put Red Berets in that park in order to scare people. Red Berets are elite unit, paramilitary organization of the intelligence agency from 90s. They are
responsible for many war crimes.
Yeah. They committed the worst war crimes in Croatia, Bosnia, and Kosovo. Actually, as a matter of fact, they were formed from the worst paramilitary organizations that committed the worst war crimes. So it's the worst war criminals from the worst paramilitary organizations from the 90s formed this unit. Now they are banned since 2003, and they cannot go out in the public in the uniform. But the government, which is connected to the war criminals, called them and put them in the park for multiple days in order to scare people. They aren't really a threat now. They are like brutal murderers and rapists and all of that. But now they're like in their 50s and 60s. So they aren't really threats to people. People could have really easily beaten them up. But it was really a stunt from the government in order to show people that they will attack people if the government feels threatened.
Considering the scope of this and the cooperation that's self-organized among the population of the cities where these demonstrations have been occurring, or Belgrade in particular, it's pretty mind-blowing. So considering how many parts of the population have been participating in this, they're organizing in their neighborhoods and in their industries, these plenums or assemblies, making decisions for themselves, and people are identifying themselves as not being aligned with a party in this, saying that this is a matter for us as neighbors or people who live in this city or this country, and not me promoting a specific agenda of a political party. Or the student movements, as was mentioned, specifically rejecting leadership, the kind of people that could get co-opted into the power structures. This seems really, really hopeful for the revolutionary potential for like decentralized administration, as a next step. I know the demands have been about more funding for this aspect of life in Serbia, or that aspect, or transparency and accountability around issues of attacks in the streets against demonstrators, or who was responsible for the Novi Sad tragedy. Are there discussions going on about creating substantive, autonomous, and lasting power outside of demonstrations and demands for a change in the administration? Is there the potential at this point, or the potential for the potential of people to start getting together in their workplaces and ask themselves, like, well, if the government decides to shut down transport during days when there's demonstrations to make it harder, so many transport workers are a part of this movement. How do we make sure that transport happens? Like, does that revolutionary horizon seem like it's something that's reachable at this point, or will it take more work?
I think it will take a lot more work, but it's starting to appear. People are starting to understand that they actually don't need government. But it's only like on a smaller scale. It's only like individuals or smaller groups of people so far. But that mentality is starting to appear, and it's getting more popular. Hopefully, if this lasts for longer, it's going to become a lot more popular. But if not, there is going to be at least a substantial base from where we can build on that mentality.
Yeah, for the longest time, these protests have been pacifist, Gandhi stuff. But since recently, people have been like looking into actively resisting the state. So, yeah, until recently, people wouldn't dare to not follow rules, except for like a one-day general strike was a major achievement. Now it looks absolutely doable.
I can add that these assemblies on local level are very important, and I thought it will be. I was optimistically acting, but I was thinking pessimistically. But I never wrote or said something pessimistically, just to hold the spirit of people I'm talking with. But for example, people were at the beginning of this assembly that I was part of were very legalistically opinionated. They wanted for us to go to the local parliament of this local part of the city and to ask for the law to make it happen that we can be asked on ourselves with these assemblies. So I just said, like, people, we don't need any validation from any kind of law. We are here in this assembly, and by itself, it has its own meaning and value and importance. And people just like that were like 5 minutes before that they were agreeing with the legalist guy. 5 minutes later, they were all hands were like shaking in agreement with this non-legalistic or anti-legalistic approach. So there is this possibility. I don't know how much this movement will last, but if it lasts long enough, some type of process will be definitely rolling. And I already it is to some degree, but we will see. It doesn't have a big, like the student movement requirements don't have a big social element. That's what scared me at the beginning. But now with these assemblies, like people are starting to talk and to speak about their own problems on local level, and that's how people will start to think even more socially, so to say, in sense of what problems exist.
Yeah, I would describe this situation as some type of, I don't know, soft cold revolution. We'll see where it goes, but hopefully it's gonna continue. If this lasts for a long time, it's gonna be great, because like in that case we can actually build some type of revolutionary movement. But if not, where it is gonna have a substantial base from where we can work. So it all depends on how long this lasts.
Yeah, that's super inspiring, and I'm really, really excited to share this, what you all have been sharing, and this context and these stories with the listenership. I guess the last question that I have on here, and we can address if there's other things that we haven't covered that you want to talk about, but the main thing that I wanted to get to next is there international support? Is that a thing that you're calling for at this time? Like, I know that that's been a thing that's been attempted to be weaponized by the administration and by the, I'm sure the fascists in the street would love to hear like, oh, really, anarchists from Croatia really are supporting this or whatever. But how can people learn more about this? How can people offer support from outside? And are there any good news sources that you would suggest people paying attention to around these issues?
Well, people can always organize solidarity actions. It's always welcome. It always helps the morale. Government isn't going to use it, nor the fascists, because there were already a lot of solidarity actions, from protests to some a bit more radical actions. But so far, government didn't use anything, and if they used it now, it would be really weird to use any specific one. As a matter of fact, they choose to ignore it. So it seems that we don't actually have support.
I can add that we got some support from Greece, because probably you know that there are big protests in Greece, also like a similar kind of accident and stuff like that. So they're all supporting, and we're like co-fighting this fight. Also, North Macedonia had a big disaster with 50 and some teenagers killed in fire in some discotheque. So students there immediately started to organize plenums and assemblies by following the Serbian student movement. Also in Ireland, I think, don't take me 100% sure, but in Ireland, I think there is some faculties that are organizing these solidarity assemblies and trying to reenact these assemblies by this principle. But some grander structures supporting the movement doesn't exist, and I kind of like it that way. So yeah, maybe some from Serbian diaspora, like people that live in USA or in Europe or in China or whatever, they are sending their support, and even like financially to donations to students, or even by some actions. But some structures, not really.
That's not all of it. There are also some protests happening in the Bosnia, some protests happening in Slovenia. So it's kind of whole region is now very active, and this way of organizing is really spreading, which is a really great thing to see, that actually something is happening like in the whole region is a positive thing, because usually there are just negative things happening in the whole region. And seeing that people are actually having solidarity for each other and not committing genocides against each other is, well, really surprising and really a great thing to see. I would say that best thing anyone can do is, well, people can start organizing anywhere. Or, well, as a matter of fact, it would be best if people started organizing everywhere. So, yeah, I would say that that's the best way you can do for solidarity. Start organizing in your own community.
Yeah, that's beautiful. You've been speaking in English for a long time, and I would imagine that's very tiring. But are there any other topics that you wanted to cover while we're still in this chat?
The protests were organized by students in 4 different biggest cities in Serbia, and each of them held this new tradition for them to walk there hundreds of kilometers. Once they arrived in one of these cities was Novi Pazar, which is the only city this large that is population is mostly Muslim. In other cities, when students from Novi Pazar were walking hundreds of kilometers to this other city to support other city student movements, they organized everything by the book for the Muslim students to have like self-organized, for them to pray, to eat their food like they should by all the rules
and fast. Because this is
fast and everything like that. And this is, I think, one of the first times in Serbia that self-organized this Muslim support exists in such a grand way in a big movement. And this needs to be mentioned. Because the movement is not anarchistic itself. It's like
it has anarchic principles, but it's not.
But it's widest net possible. But even like that, it really showed like a big amount of acceptance of different religion and stuff in this sense that I mentioned, organizing stuff for them.
And in 90s we had a lot of genocides, and most of them based on the religion. So this is a huge step.
Yeah, that's amazing. Ilik, would you mind saying what you were saying about when the mic was off, about your experience as a queer person around these demonstrations?
Oh, okay. Basically, before this, society was mostly queer-phobic, Some of the people were openly queerphobic, and they would shout slurs on the street. But most of the people were like privately queerphobic, like a closed queerphobic society, basically conservative, you could call it. We actually never had that step where we had like a liberal way of acceptance, where it's like, oh, this group is defined by these characteristics, and they are also people, we should support them, and all of that. When this movement started, it actually went straight from queerphobia to radical acceptance, where it's like, now it's like, we're all people, like, what the why would they hate you? So it's very interesting where we jumped like straight from queerphobia to radical acceptance and totally skipped that liberal transition.
And you specifically felt that as a non-binary person.
Yeah. Like as someone who's like non-binary and bi and poly and queer as generally, I experienced that. Like it's very noticeable, and it's not just me. I talk like with other comrades and other queer people. They also have the exact same experience. So it's something really unexpected, but something really fantastic to see.
That's really amazing.
Especially because it went not to liberal acceptance, but it went into the radical acceptance. It's a really fantastic thing to see. I don't know how we got here. I really don't know how to explain it. It just happened.
Casual misogyny, I think, exists everywhere in the world, sadly. And I feel like times of rupture can be opportunities for people to have conversations about like, oh, don't make those assumptions about this person based on like your reading of them being a woman or whatever. Has like a binary misogyny been like challenged as well in these spaces? Does that question make sense? Sorry, it's a lot of terms.
Yeah.
Some elements of society which tend to be more conservative, such as the farmers or the student guards at protests, have had some misogynistic. I don't think they're aware that being misogynistic. I don't think it's in bad faith. But for instance, dividing male and female guards and sending male guards to where they think is going to be more dangerous because, women are, less capable of fighting or whatever. And the comments regarding that have been very, against that. The people recognize the misogyny in such actions and they oppose it.
And it's very much not accepted. And it was more of a thing in the start. Now it's like mostly like that type of misogyny is.
Okay, well, thank you, all three of you, for having this conversation. And I wish you luck and solidarity and health. And I look forward to hearing about the successful revolution that will eventually spread and overthrow the golden dictatorship era of the United States here at home.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, of course.
You.
And now some words from anarchist prisoner Sean Swain.
I've noticed that the mainstream media has stopped reporting on Luigi Mangione. At first, newscasters were obsessed with the case. A shooting in downtown New York City, the death of an insurance CEO, the intrigue, the mystery, what it all might mean. Then Luigi Mangione was arrested at a McDonald's in Pennsylvania, turned in no less by the worker toiling over the deep fryer, who likely should have given Luigi free food rather than calling the cops. But from that moment, everything changed. Across the interweb, Luigi Mangione became a kind of folk hero. People celebrated him, raised over $1 million for his defense. Images of him appear in graffiti in China. At the same time, the media, seemingly perplexed, tried to correct all of us. They rolled out criminologists and psychologists in an effort to media-splain to us the difference between good guys and bad guys, because it seems all 8 billion of us on the planet appear to be confused. The popular consensus didn't change. So, as usual, media just stopped talking about Luigi Mangione altogether. Just pretended his popularity wasn't happening. They quietly bore their cross of confusion and bewilderment. I bet back in the 13th century, the news media for Sherwood Forest tried to convince the residents of Nottingham to see Robin Hood as a terrorist, just like they wanted us to hate and fear Billy the Kid and Jesse James, John Dillinger, Bonnie and Clyde. And I suppose this reveals the real role of news media, to control and influence the public in a way that's in the interest of order, which is to say, the order that benefits the status quo, the rich and the powerful. Luigi Mangione is one of those interesting symbols. I say symbol because none of us know him. We haven't eaten lunch with him or shared an Uber or played beer pong with him in a dorm room. We imagine who he is. Or we don't even care who he is. Perhaps we simply admire what he did. But even in that, his act was also symbolic. What is it that we would admire? It's not merely the shooting, the pulling of a trigger. Gang members in Chicago do that every minute of every day, and nobody raises $1 million for their criminal defenses. It's more than a shooting. It's someone we imagine to feel powerless and fed up, taking a stand against those with power who use it corruptly. In that sense, Luigi Mangione is each one of us who has felt powerless and fed up. And so we can imagine ourselves as him, a representation of us, if we had only punched our boss in the face rather than tucking our chins, if we had only stood up to the traffic cop or the tax man or the bill collector or any number of people and structures that exercise power over us without our consent. We live in a world where the suicide rate is always double the homicide rate, which indicates that 2/3 of us internalized our anger and indignation rather than project it outward. And so perhaps Luigi Mangione gives us that one moment where we imagine ourselves projecting that anger and indignation outward. Those in power fear direct action, whether the power is economic, political, or social. Power seems to be in agreement that violence is never the answer. Everyone feeling powerless isn't quite so convinced. And so, Luigi Mangione is now more popular than Jesus. I suspect power should also be afraid of him getting found not guilty. I think that's a very real possibility. Legal consultants have suggested an insanity defense, and I hope that's not the case. An insanity defense to me seems like a renunciation of the act, as if to say he only did this because he's crazy. I have to imagine everyone who secretly admires what he did would feel disappointed to hear him claim he's mentally ill, and, by extension, so are all of us. I don't know much about New York law, but if it's anything like Ohio law, I'd like to see Luigi Mangione plead not guilty by reason of self-defense. In Ohio law, self-defense would include not just the defense of yourself, but the defense of others, in threat of imminent harm. And that's where things get interesting. He could reasonably argue that thousands of people were in threat of imminent harm, that people were being harmed continually by that CEO's policies, and that because insurance companies are beyond the law and the harm they do is ostensibly legal, direct action was the only option available. Imagine a train of witnesses testifying to how their lives were ruined by that CEO and his insurance company. Imagine the defense lawyer articulating to the jury all of the future harm that would have happened if that CEO had not been shot, had instead shared his blueprint with the other insurance predators attending that conference where that CEO was scheduled to speak. Of course, this wouldn't be a self-defense claim, as the law intended. What it would actually be is something called jury nullification. Jury nullification is the justice system's greatest fear. It's where an attorney implicitly tells a jury, yeah, my guy did it. Yeah, it's illegal. But find him not guilty anyway, because it's the right thing to do. Jury nullification is a big middle finger to the justice system. Luigi Mangione's lawyers can't argue jury nullification directly. No judge will allow it. So lawyers have to find a way to argue it without arguing it, and argue it without getting caught. Perhaps the claim of self-defense is a way to do that. I think he can win at trial. He'll have 12 jurors. All 12 will be human beings. No insurance company will be seated. Of those 12 jurors, he only needs one. Just one with the courage to say no. And that's what it comes down to, perhaps. That singular powerful word no. Luigi Mangione's direct action can be summed up with that word, no. I have to think that at least one juror out of 12, having felt powerless and fed up, can express all of our righteous indignation by repeating that same word, no. This is anarchist prisoner Sean Swain from the Super Duper Uber Mega Ultra Hyper Turbo Multi Maxi Max in Youngstown, Ohio. If you're listening, you are the resistance.
You can still write Sean at his new old new again address at Sean Swain number A243205 OSP Youngstown 878 Coatesville Hubbard Road, Youngstown, Ohio 44505. You can find his past writings, updates on his case, hear his past audio, find out how to get his books, plus ways to contribute to his legal defense fund at seanswain.org. This is The Final Straw Radio. This show will later be archived at thefinalstrawradio.noblogs.org, and you can email us with questions and suggestions at thefinalstrawradio@riseup.net or thefinalstrawradio@protonmail.com. If you'd like to use any episode for your project or radio show, feel free to do so. Just send us an email to let us know. If you care to, you can send us letters at TFSR, P.O. Box 6004, Asheville, North Carolina, 28816. Programming support is brought to you by Firestorm Books. Located at 1022 Haywood Road in West Asheville, Firestorm is a bookstore and social movement space owned by its workers, in operation since 2008. Their event calendar and complete catalog of books can be found online at firestorm.coop.